Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maya McGuire, and I'm today's host for the Bite Size Science webinar series. Today we have our Florida Sea Grant expert, Dr. Vincent Encomio. He's going to be talking to us about an ocean-inspired Halloween, myths, monsters, and mollusks. Everybody is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box, and Vincent will answer them at the end of his presentation. I'll now turn it over to Vincent.
Oh, great. Thank you, Maya. Thank you so much. And I don't know if everybody heard that, but as Maya had said, title of my talk is Myths, Monsters, and Mollusks. And I hope you have a lot of fun listening to what I have to talk to you about. I had a lot of fun putting together this presentation. So a little bit about me. I am the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent for Martin and St. Lucie counties. And I do work extension and outreach. My programs related to stormwater and water quality, harmful algal blooms. I've done a lot of work with habitat restoration. And then, of course, in forums like this with Bite-Sized Marine Science and Marine Science Education. So let's begin, if you dare. So anyway, I was really fascinated. I've always wanted to do a talk like this because I've always been, and this goes back to hundreds of years of people being fascinated with the sea. And if you think about the times in the, like say in the 12th, 13th century to the age of exploration from the 1400s to the 1600s, people really didn't know a lot about the ocean. And so there's this allure and adventure of the unknown, but also the fact that the ocean was this scary, dangerous place. And if you look at old charts and maps of the world, during those times, the edges of those maps will oftentimes will have monsters and mythical creatures. So, and I think a lot of the monsters, the sea monsters and myths are really a reflection of that fear and fascination with the undiscovered sea. And one of those early myths is that of sea serpents. So this is an old drawing from the 16th century from 16th century Norway, and it describes a sea serpent that's over 200 feet long, 20 feet in diameter, comes out of its cavern only on summer nights and fine weather to destroy their livestock, or eats all kinds of different seafoods like cuttlefish, lobster, and crabs. So I don't know. It seems like, hey, if it only comes out on summer nights and nice weather, how tough can it really be? But anyway, it gives a sense. This gives you a sense of what people thought of the ocean during those early days, and what they reflected, what they didn't know and were fascinated by. But these sea serpents, what it's been found is oftentimes what they were probably seeing was an animal just like this. This is a giant oarfish. And this is known to be the longest bony fish alive, up to about 26 feet. And there are other accounts and other things that I found in my research that it could possibly be longer, but I think this is sort of safe to say, certainly over 20 feet. And it inhabits depths from anywhere from over 600 to 3,000 feet around the world, typically temperate waters, particularly around continental shelves or slopes around off islands. They feed on zooplankton, so they're not really that dangerous for people. And most of the observations in history have been from strandings. There's some recent observations of them swimming in their natural habitat. I think there was a camera deployed off an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. But for the most part, most of what we know or have seen of this species is from strandings when they're weakened or about to die. Right here is a video here of an oarfish in Mexico. I'm going to give this a shot, see how this works. Here we go. Hopefully this will load up. There we go. So, and this kind of, the people here that in Mexico were lucky enough to find this fish in, oh, it looks like it, there we go. Finally, there we go. I'm just going to show this just for a little bit. It looks like I'm having a little bit of bandwidth issues, but this is really cool because it really shows this fish. You don't often see this. A fish like this is so rare, so rarely seen, at least, in shallow water. And this is quite really, just some really cool footage of this. And you can find this on YouTube. If you Google Oarfish, you'll not only see videos like this, but you'll also see pictures of strandings, which I will show next here. I think this is about to end. So I'll go ahead and let this play out. Yeah, this is in a shallow lagoon off of Baja, Mexico. And there were two of them. And I think they were both anywhere from 12 to 16 feet in length. So anyway, most of what you'll see if you Google Oarfish on the internet are things like this, strandings of oarfish where they're dead or sickened and they float ashore. This particular fish floated ashore in California, in Southern California on Catalina Island in 2013. And this one here, this specimen is about 18 feet long. So pretty impressive looking animal. And so one of the things that's interesting is that a few scientists have asked is, why are these fish stranding? What is happening to some of these fish? And there is, in California, the couple scientists have looked at oarfish strandings in historical records and recent records and found, not obviously this doesn't happen very often, but what was really interesting is around 2014 to 2016, 17, actually it's 2016, there is a little bit more, about 5 strandings. And keep in mind, 5 doesn't sound like a lot, but this rarely happens. And what they attributed this to is some warmer than normal waters. And those warmer than normal waters have often, recently off the west coast of North America, have been referred to this monster here known as the Blob. And the Blob really isn't this from this 1950s movie, but really this big patch of warm water throughout the Pacific, forming what they would call, the Blob also is known as a marine heat wave. And this doesn't happen that often, but with climate change, people are concerned, scientists are concerned that these events might not only be more frequent, but more severe. So that maybe climate change is the real monster here in this case. So moving on to another myth, which I thought was coming back to the East Coast, particularly Florida, is the myth of the mermaid. And you guys might know where I'm going with this. This is our iconic Florida animal, the manatee. They are, their taxonomic order is known as Sirenia, which sort of gives you an idea of how people thought of it as a mermaid-like creature way back when. Actually, one of the first accounts of a manatee in North America was a written account from Christopher Columbus when he came over to North America, and he thought he was seeing a manatee. They're obviously one of our beloved animals here in Florida. They are threatened. Federal status is threatened. That's actually a recent downgrade. They originally were considered endangered and just recently got moved up, I should say, not so much a downgrade in status to threatened. And a lot of those threats are boat strikes. That's a common. If you look at that animal, you see sort of the scars on this animal here, and a lot of those are propeller scars. Habitat loss in the Indian River Lagoon, where I am, we've lost an immense amount of seagrass habitat, which is their main food source. And so there's a lot of concern about the survival of those populations of manatees. and harmful algal blooms. And I'll get to that and a little bit more of that, but we've had some persistent harmful algal blooms in the Indian River Lagoon, and manatees have been known to be directly poisoned by harmful algal bloom toxins, like on the southwest coast of Florida from the red tide, but also harmful algal blooms have been implicated in shading out seagrass habitat to where that food supply can disappear because they can't grow, because all the algae is shading out the sunlight for that seagrass to grow. So even though the manatee to me does not look like this, and I'm sort of befuddled at how Christopher Columbus could mistake a manatee for this. This is actually a real life mermaid. This is a state park in Florida, Weeki State Park, where they actually have women who dress up as manatees and do underwater shows, and actually people can sign up and dress up as manatees, not manatees, as mermaids, and swim with them. But it's so funny to consider that Christopher Columbus would actually mistake a manatee for a mermaid. I know he spent long days at sea, but when I think of a manatee and confusing that with the mermaid, I really think more of this. Anyway, so this guy looks a little bit closer to a manatee than the previous picture. But anyway, moving on from this, one of the things that I've always loved, like old horror movies from the 50s and the 60s. And one movie that really resonated with me since I was a kid was Alfred Hitchcock's classic, The Birds. And what's really cool about this, it was based on a horror story in the early 50s by a British author, Daphne, even though she has a French name, Daphne du Maurier. But it was also inspired by an incident in 1961 in Monterey Bay, California, in which flocks of seabirds flew erratically, crashing into people's houses and dying, in a sense, almost like they were attacking people and people's structures. And those two stories inspired Alfred Hitchcock's his 1963 movie, The Birds, ranked as one of the 7th greatest thrillers in American cinema. And it's also interesting to note that Alfred Hitchcock spent his summers in Monterey. So he was probably around when this incident happened. But what caused that 1961 bird frenzy? It turns out there's been a recent study where even though it's been thought for a while this was the case, but a harmful algal bloom species known as Pseudonychia, which produces a toxin known as domoic acid. Domoic acid causes amnesiac shellfish poisoning. It's pretty nasty, something you definitely don't want to get. In addition to gastrointestinal problems, it can cause some neurological symptoms like short-term memory loss, for example, is one of those, which is why it's called amnesiac shellfish poisoning. Disorientation and seizures, and wildlife deaths. It's been implicated in a lot of deaths of or unusual mortality events of wildlife on the west coast of North America. A recent study in 2012, where they looked at some zooplankton samples archived from around that time, found high amounts in multiple species of Pseudonychia in those archived zooplankton samples. So it's kind of like this really cool forensic study where they kind of had greater evidence that Pseudonychia was responsible for that 1961 bird frenzy. And going back to this ever-present blob, in 2015, a very extended Pseudonychia bloom on the West Coast that the blob formed in 2014. In 2015, it closed the Dungeness crab fishery throughout the West Coast of North America. And that's a huge deal because that's a $200 million fishery. It also closed another razor clam fishery in Washington State, which is worth about $9 million to those local state Washington State residents, as well as other fisheries and multiple sea lion poisoning. So again, going back to this issue of Maybe the real monster here is some of these climate induced or climate heightened or heightened phenomenon in our oceans. Another movie that I really enjoyed when I was a kid is The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And this is, I didn't know, I was trying to see when I first looked into this, is there like a marine science connection here to this movie? And apparently there is. The design by this woman here you see drawing, Millicent Patrick. There's a really interesting story about her, by the way. There's a book called The Lady from the Black Lagoon, or The Lady in the Black Lagoon. And it's kind of a neat little story. But she designed the Gillman suit. And a lot of that design was inspired by the coelacanth, which is a fairly deep water fish from about 300 to 1,500 foot deep. It was discovered, so to speak, in 1938 off the coast of the eastern coast of South Africa. Again, in a set of islands north of Madagascar, the Comoros Islands, in 1952. And that 1952 date is really interesting because that discovery really inspired the director of this movie and Millicent Patrick. They were particularly captivated by the lobe-like fins of the coelacanth. And what was interesting about the coelacanth at the time of its discovery, it was thought to be this living fossil because it was related to fish from the Devonian period of over 350 to 400 million years ago. It's since found that is actually a reasonably diverse set of taxa, and they're found not only off Africa, but there are some species in Asia as well. But that was an inspiration for that movie. And then, of course, as many horror movies go, it inspired another sequel, Revenge of the Creature. And I mentioned this because there's some fun Florida facts about this, about both movies. The original one was filmed in Palaca, Florida, and Wakulla Springs. The sequel was in 1955, was filmed in the St. Johns River, Jacksonville, and Marineland, which is next door to University of Florida's Whitney Lab. And the Revenge of the Creature was the first role of a certain famous actor and director. And I don't know if you recognize this person. He's very young in this movie, but you might recognize this one. This is Clint Eastwood, who's obviously gone on to become a very well-known actor and director as well. The other really cool thing about the Creature from the Black Lagoon is this movie just recently, which won Best Picture in 2017, The Shape of Water, fantastic movie, by the way, was inspired by or an homage to the Creature from the Black Lagoon by Guillermo del Toro. That was a particularly influential movie on him when he was young. So moving on to other movies, monster movies or nature-based monster movies, of course, I can't get through this talk without talking a little bit about sharks. I'm not going to spend too much time on sharks. Jaws, incidentally, is the #2 greatest thriller on the American Film Institute list. And with that being one of the most popular movies of all times, I don't have too much to add here. Obviously, everybody is familiar with Shark Week, and all the spin-offs and shows and fear and fascination with sharks. And without Jaws, we probably wouldn't have modern classics like this one here. You guys are probably familiar with this one. I'm not going to say much more about it. As the subtitle says, enough said. But moving on to another favorite movie monster that I like are zombies. And so did you know that there are actually zombies in the marine environment? In this case, the zombies are crabs. And this is a black-fingered mud crab. This is a crab that is commonly found on oyster reefs. I've done a lot of work on oyster restoration, so I'm very familiar with this little guy. And what happens is the zombie part of the crab is when it gets parasitized by this particular animal called Loxo or Loxophthalacus panopiae, is actually a parasitic barnacle. And they have a really interesting life cycle. I'll show you here. If you start from the blue square there, that is a female larvae of this barnacle, the rhizocephalan barnacle. When crabs molt is when they're particularly vulnerable to parasitism. They inject themselves into those crabs. An embryonic cell mass grows on the inside of that crab, spreads throughout the crab's body, and then eventually they produce eggs, and those eggs can be fertilized by a male larval barnacle, and then continues that life cycle. And so they're basically, the crab is completely taken over by this parasitic barnacle to the point where they are in effect zombies. And they can parasitize males and females. When they parasitize males, they in effect become feminized. It's a phenomenon called parasitic castration. And then the host, that crab, essentially becomes an egg and larvae factory, just producing more young barnacle parasites. And it is actually controlling the behavior of those crabs. As that sort of barnacle egg mass grows, it really resembles the egg mass of a crab. And the crab actually cares for that parasitic egg sac, ventilating it and to make sure it's oxygenated. And this, the photo I'm showing you here, is actually another species of parasitic barnacle that parasitizes the Alaskan king crab. Again, another important fishery. And really, even though they've described these as zombie crabs, this really reminds me a lot of this old movie, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This is a really cool movie. I encourage you to check that out. There's also a remake in the 70s that I thought was quite well done, where essentially these alien pods take over people's bodies and control them. And this is essentially what the rhizocephalan barnacle is doing to these crab hosts. And again, not to belabor the point, but again, that blob, one thing that they are concerned about as temperatures rise in places like the west coast of North America, they found that the larval development phase of those parasitic barnacles does speed up with temperature. So the fear is, even though the current prevalence of that parasite in the Alaskan king crab fishery is quite low, there is concern over time, is that problem going to get worse? Compounding that even further is the fact that that particular fishery, young females and gravid females are thrown back, but parasitized males are confused for females, and so could they potentially skew the population in the future? Now, moving on to the classic marine science monster, the Kraken. And really, as you probably many of you may know, the Kraken really is the giant squid, Architeuthis dux. It has a global distribution throughout the world's oceans, very deep waters, 1,000 to over 3,000 feet deep, very, very big. It's actually the second largest invertebrate. There's actually a squid the colossal squid is actually bigger than this one, but it gets up to over a maximum length of over 40 feet. They feed on fish, other squid, and occasionally there's been some gut content studies of opportunistically of a squid that washed up in New Zealand where they found other giant squid parts, and they think it might have been two squids that were actually fighting each other. And they're obviously famous. They're famously known to be the prey of sperm whales, but they're also, as much as we've known from their carcasses, whether they're gut content studies or carcasses that have washed up and we've learned about their anatomy, they're rarely seen in their natural habitat. 2012 off the coast of Japan was one of the first video documentations of the giant squid. And I want to share with you a more recent one. This is last year in 2019 in the Gulf of Mexico. Let me play this real quick. This is a video of a giant squid. And you see those, it's a little slow here. There we go. Well, I don't know if that came out very well or not, but you can Google this and you'll find this. This was an expedition. There we go. Let's try this again. I'm going to go ahead and move on. But this was an expedition to the Gulf of Mexico by a local scientist here in Fort Pierce, Florida, Edie Witter, and her organization Orca. And they've developed this camera system, low light camera system. And if you could see here, this little ball, this is actually what they call an E-jelly. This is an optical lure. And you can see the lights on the bottom to this image to the right. What this optical or E-jelly, this optical lure is doing is simulating the bioluminescence of this common deep water jellyfish shown here at the top. The middle image is the bioluminescence of that jellyfish. And so when those lights are going, it actually, what they think that is simulating is an animal attacking the jellyfish, and then it sends out this signal of bioluminescence to attract another animal to attack the thing that's attacking the jellyfish. It's a what they call the burglar hypothesis. And so by using this E-jelly lure, they were able to lure a giant squid and get captured, and that squid got captured on video. The second time a giant squid has been captured on video in its natural habitat. So that's really exciting. So I've got another recent video here. I'm just gonna, hopefully this will work. I don't know if these are all working that well for you guys, but this one is cool. This is actually in shallow water. Again, this is probably a squid that is not doing too well. I can only guess by its coloration or lack thereof, but this is in a fairly enclosed bay in Japan. And but I just thought the video was so striking. The guy actually got in the water and dove with it. So I thought that was pretty cool. And you can find this on YouTube as well. It's a Toyama Bay. This is a video from 2015 of a giant squid in shallow water. It's about 12 feet long in this case. Okay, so anyway, this, oops, let me go back. Sorry about that. So this legend of the Kraken, whether it's a giant squid or a giant octopus, has lived on in modern times through various stories, books, and movies. And both the shark is showing here on the left, Jaws, and this, and again, I love these old classic sci-fi horror movies from the 50s. This is a giant octopus, and it came from beneath the sea. That's the Golden Gate Bridge, by the way. And like the shark, these monster movies have been revived, rehashed many times over. Hollywood, always looking to capitalize on these two marine monster genres, again, have ventured into the realm of the kind of ridiculous here. This is, you might be familiar with this one. I'm not going to say too much about this. Obviously, this has no basis in reality and science. But I guess Hollywood's probably thinking if sharks and giant octopi play well to audiences, yeah, how can you lose if you just combine them? Incidentally, this is also starring, the star of this movie is Eric Roberts, who is Julia Roberts' brother. He's kind of, as Julia Roberts is sort of an A-list actress, I think her brother is kind of known as a king of the B-list movies. And I'm pretty sure that they don't share the same agent. But with that, I hope that was fun and informative about different animals that are that have inspired movies, inspired myths and legends. And with that, I guess I'll take any questions, but I think first we're going to do a quick poll. Is that?
That's
Correct?
correct. Thanks,
Okay,
Vincent.
great.
So we've just popped up a poll. Appreciate you taking a couple of seconds to click on your responses to that. We'll leave it open for a few more seconds, give everybody a chance to fill it in, and then I will read Vincent the questions from the chat box.
All right.
Give it about 5 more seconds.
Okay. If anybody has any more questions, my email is right there. And feel free to contact me later if you'd like.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vincent. That was a lot of fun. We have one question in the chat box asking, how big is the blob now?
So those images I showed, it was comparing that first blob in 2000. It started around later 2013 and it went through 2015. There was a new one in 2019, and I haven't really kept up with it, but that's pretty much, I can go back to that. But both of those images show pretty much a sizable chunk of the East Pacific, particularly in the Northeast Pacific. And it's almost like two sections of the blob. One's kind of in the Northeast Pacific towards Alaska, and there's a little bit, another sort of smaller one in off of Southern California. So a large portion of that ocean basin. I can go back to that if do you think I should, let me see. Yeah, let me see. There we go. There's one. Yeah, so you can see those areas of red, higher than normal temperatures. In both of those images, it's quite a lot of, big section of the North Pacific there. Any other questions? Oh, I see a network issue here. Hey, Maya.
Maya,
Can you catch me?
Oh, I'm sorry. I've been rambling on and I was muted. That was pretty silly of me.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just had a little message that said network issue. So I was worried that I had lost connection there for a second. So
Nope, you're still on. I was just mentioning that it was a little bit after 4:30, so we do appreciate everybody joining us today. Hopefully all of our attendees had as much fun as I did. That was a great presentation, Vincent. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions come up in the chat box. So once again, thank you all for joining us, and we hope we'll see you at future bite-sized science webinars.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Cool. Should I go ahead and stop sharing?
We'll wait just a minute.
Okay.